Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the 5th edition of FinTech Talks, which for the first time goes fully digital. So let me thank you all for connecting via live streaming and welcome to the FinTech Talk 2020, FinTech, the Recovery Enabler. Today's key topics are leadership, get comfortable with uncertainty, investments, trust bold ideas and smart people, open finance, break free from monoliths, and artificial intelligence, support humans to keep the course during turbulence. A decade ago, many companies could gain competitive advantage by embracing innovation that were already underway. That was the past. Today, to stay ahead of the game, companies must work systematically to detect innovation and new possibilities. But the question remains, how can we sense and act upon a future that remains unclear? At FinTech 2020, we present different point of views from different regions, and we can try to gain from those experience the answer to it. In the previous episode, Road to FinTech Talks, we discovered what leadership meant, having the great opportunity to listen to Swapnendu Mohanty, one of the most prominent members of the FinTech field. At this end today, we are going to hear from noticeable members of our FinTech network. One from the Silicon Valley, where everything started, one from the UK, the beacon for FinTech in EMEA. Then we hear from a great banker and FinTech investor from Italy and many other FinTechies of our ecosystem. It's now my pleasure to give the stage to one of the FinTech Stage co-founders, Matteo Rizzi. Hey Matteo, ciao.
Ciao Michele, grazie. I am actually super excited to welcome all of you to this very special edition of the FinTech Talks. And, this year we could not make, as every year for the past 5 years, our FinTech Stage Festival live. But we decided to bring you an amazing array of speakers and great content through the virtual game that we are all playing in this very particular year. Yesterday, we had a sort of an opening of this virtual edition of the festival, having Brad King, Jim Marous, Lazaro Campos, myself, moderated by Dara Tarkovsky, and we talked about strategy, leadership, and recovery. Most of these themes are going to be taken back in today's discussion. So welcome again to the 2020 edition of the FinTech Talks. Back to Michele.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Matteo. Now I'm going to leave the stage to our first guest, Alaina Sparks. Alaina, as US FinTech practice leader, she helps shape Deloitte's global FinTech agenda, also addressing digital transformation and innovation. Please welcome Alaina, reporting FinTech from the Silicon Valley.
Thank you, Michelle and Matteo. Good morning and greetings from the San Francisco Bay. It is a pleasure to offer a few of my thoughts about the global and US FinTech sector today. Thank you for the invitation. And by way of introduction, I lead Deloitte's US FinTech practice, both serving FinTech companies and developing solutions with FinTech companies. FinTechs have been driving incredible innovation in financial services and across a number of industries, for that matter, for over 20 years. As we know, this year, there have been challenges and opportunities alike impacting FinTech companies quite differently depending on customer demand for various FinTech products, whether insurance, loans, or payments as an example, and how those products are offered, whether on a consumption basis whether delivered digitally, whether contactless or not. We have been tracking key trends across the fintech sector for the past few years, relying on venture scanner data back to 1998. So what are the key trends that we are seeing this year? From a fintech launch perspective, there were 5 reported VC-backed fintech launches through Q3. That reported number is often updated in subsequent quarters, and I do think we will see a rise in that number through the end of this year, but likely not close to last year's reported 86 VC-backed fintech launches. In fact, launches have been on a steady decline for the past 6 years, when a reported nearly 850 fintech companies were launched in 2014. From an investment perspective, across 700 fintechs, there were nearly 1,000 reported funding events, less than half of last year, raising almost $35 billion through Q3. This is down 30% year over year from nearly $50 billion. Year over year, VC investment dropped by 20%, while PE investment increased by nearly the same percentage. From a sector perspective, we saw banking fintechs and prop techs continue to raise the most, with InvestTech as the only category seeing year-over-year growth. From a regional perspective, U.S. companies continue to attract the most investment, with 52% of funding through Q3, followed by China, the UK, India, and Germany. Companies based in those top 5 countries collectively benefiting from over 80% of all fintech investment. Where we've seen tremendous activity, of course, is in M&A, with M&A deal volume increasing 85% year over year through Q3, and the number of deals increasing 12%. In fact, we saw more deals and greater volume than we have seen over the past 3 years. Much of that activity, of course, was earlier in the year. In contrast, while we did not see much IPO activity earlier in the year, 2020 has now become a record year for IPOs. We saw an incredible spike last quarter and are continuing to see that trend. The 7 IPOs last quarter raised more equity, nearly $4 billion, than any quarter in the past 6 years. This activity, of course, is due in part to the rise of listing through special purpose acquisition companies. So what's the outlook for fintech? I expect that we will increasingly see more consolidation, as we know that customers are looking for comprehensive financial solutions by fewer trusted companies. I expect that we will see a greater number of partnerships among financial institutions, fintechs, tech and retail companies. Industry lines are blurring, and I doubt that we will refer to fintech in the way that we do today and several years to come. From an investment perspective, at least in the short term, I expect that we will see continued majority funding going toward those later stage, more mature fintech businesses, driving mega deals and significant increases in valuation. As PitchBook reported this week, in the US, 5 fintech companies represented 30% of the companies with the biggest gain in valuation this year: Stripe, Chime, Robinhood, Better, and Marqeta. Each of these companies, in addition to many others, are believed to be heading for IPOs. Again, I would expect to see the IPO trend continue, and also continued interest and funding from non-traditional investors, corporations, hedge funds, investment banks, and others. In terms of fintech launches, like the steady increase in fintech launches that we saw post the financial crisis, I expect that the number of fintech companies will climb again. The challenges that we have all seen this year will serve as a catalyst for innovation in financial services, and I look forward to seeing the solutions that will be born out of this crisis, especially seeing how those that have struggled most, those that are underserved or unserved, will be fairly served in the future. And my hope is that we will see more diversity amongst the founder community, gender and racial diversity, diversity of all types. We need to see this kind of equity and inclusion across fintech as well. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Alaina, for your great insights. And I pass the mic to Matteo for the next guest.
So I have to tell you a little bit of a story before. Michele, it will be interesting to hear that. The next speaker, Peter Hinson, is one of the first speakers I've heard back into my InnoTribe and Swift days. Uh, Peter comes from Belgium, and I was living in Belgium back then. It was like over a decade ago, and it was like the first time that we were doing this whole speech things about the future and innovation, and Peter was invited to one of the keynotes that we were doing at the InnoTribe space, and blown my mind out. I mean, for a long time, it was one of the most captivating, smart, subtle as well speakers I've ever heard. And I've been trying to bring it to both FinTech Stage and the FinTech Talks for a while, but because it's so busy, it was very complicated to have him. So somehow, I am really thankful for this virtual version that makes things a little bit easy. I don't want to spoil where he's connecting from, but even the place that he's giving his keynote has an amazing story that I really hope he's going to tell. Peter is a technologist, an entrepreneur, a teacher, has been exited a couple of companies, and he has been working with large global corporations for most of his professional life. And when we were sort of catching up last time, he says, I'm passionate about the stories. And by the way, he's going to beat his own personal record of the number of slides presented in 20 minutes. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Peter Hinsen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much, Matteo, for that very, very kind introduction. For those of you who are wondering after what Matteo said where I am, I'm actually in a church. I bought a church 2 years ago to house my apple collection. I'm one of the largest apple collectors in Western Europe. And I call this my Apple Chapel. And this is basically where I do most of my streaming and seminars now since March of this year. But let me go to the presentation. I want to talk about something which is very close to my heart. I call this the never normal. I think this is exactly the world that we're in today. We're in an environment which is called the never normal, and it's a little bit of a reference to a book that I wrote exactly 10 years ago called The New Normal, about what happens in a world where technology stops being special and actually becomes normal. And that is pretty much what happened in the last decade. Digital became absolutely normal. And this is one of my favorite slides from the last presidential elections in 2016, when everybody wanted to take a selfie with Hillary Clinton. But this is the Democratic Convention of 2020, when digital was the only option we had. And thank God that this new normal was there, because we're constantly online, we're never offline, we're constantly connected. And thank God we had that in the very strange episode of the last 8 months, because the new normal was actually essential for us to be able to counter and remedy what happened in 2020. I don't have to explain the global impact, but for me, what happened in the last 8 months was, I call it the 2020 digital stress test. We had to figure out if we could still survive in a world where digital was the only option, as an individual, as a family, and as an organization. And I have no idea how you actually experienced the lockdown. In my house, it was very, very simple. I have 2 children, and my appreciation as a father was completely correlated to the quality of the Wi-Fi signal in our house. If the Wi-Fi was good, I was okay as a dad. And if there was a tiny hiccup, which gave a millisecond interruption in their TikTok stream, they openly questioned if I ever got a degree in computer science. Now, it was fascinating because not just lockdown, we saw that digital was the new normal, but in almost every type of exit scenario, we saw that technology and digital is playing an ever-increasing role. This was a great example, the robot dog patrolling in South Korea to see if people were respecting social distancing or not. But in this world where digital is absolutely normal, I think we all passed the 2020 digital stress test. And what was interesting is digital, was always the cherry on the cake for many corporations. Now in Corona, it was the cake. And if you look at the big changeover, BC-AC, before Corona, after Corona, many people are now saying, when are we going back to the old normal? Well, maybe the old normal doesn't actually exist anymore. Maybe there's a greater sense of uncertainty about what's ahead. As a matter of fact, I think instead of the new normal, we have to start talking about the never normal, because we're in a situation where technology changes economy and that changes society. And this becomes, I think, an ever-increasing wheel of change. I've talked about disruption a lot in the last 10 years, the last decade, and it was about digital disruption. But I think what we need to look at is a world of constant change. And I believe that we're probably going to have to brace ourselves for a number of seismic shocks. Some of them will still be technological in nature. I mean, a lot of the technologies that we talked about the last couple of years haven't really matured yet. Virtual and augmented reality, the real power of big data analytics, the real power of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and the real impact of, I think, mass automation. I think this is a powerful cocktail, which will probably give us in the next decade more disruption than in the last. But it's not just technological. We're in the middle of a biological seismic shock that is far from over. Look at the biggest concern we had before COVID. It was the environment. Think about ecological seismic shocks. I mean, this is a scene from Blade Runner 2049, one of my favorite movies. But this is, San Francisco not too long ago. A few weeks ago, we had the forest fires that were basically giving San Francisco very much the same skyline as in Blade Runner 2049. If you remember the public discontent that we had as a result of the ecology, I think this is also one of the big themes that we have to look at, because we might be actually bracing ourselves for some fundamental social seismic shocks as well. And let's not forget, the last 18 months, we've seen an escalation of struggle between the US and China, a geopolitical confrontation that used to be a trade war and then escalated into a full-blown technology war. I think we're now in a situation where we see that decoupling into effect. There's a technology stack that comes out of the West, which we all know and like, and then there's a new technology stack that is coming out of the East, which in my opinion is more disruptive than anything I've ever seen in my life. So we're entering a world where disorder is the norm, and instead of being afraid of this uncertainty, I think we should embrace it, because it allows us to actually look at a series of opportunities. Every single one of those seismic shocks actually triggers things. It triggers systemic shifts. And I think this is a very interesting thing. Look at, for example, consumer behavior. This was already greatly altered as a result of digital. We know more about the consumer than ever before. And then COVID happened and only accelerated that change in consumer behavior. It's not just consumers. How we make money, operating models and business models are more fluctuating than ever before. It also has a huge impact on capacity and resources. How many people and resources do we need to actually get things done? That is more volatile than ever before. And you can see the enormous impact in financial performance. I still feel sorry for anyone who put so much effort into the budget 2019, to budget 2020 last year in November 2019. And by the March of this year, we could just basically throw it into the wastebasket. So I believe that this volatility is going to be that new normal going forward. And that's why I started talking about this concept of the never normal. I think we're entering a decade of the never normal. And it's a number of characteristics that I think are crucial to understand. The first in the never normal is that everything is more fluid than ever before. We have super fluidity. Look at the last 7 months where, for example, work has been transformed in front of our very eyes. Some of you might still go to the office. It's not the same office anymore. Most of you have spent a lot of time work from home. And I really feel sorry for most of my colleagues with small children. It was perfectly illustrated by this brilliant Fisher-Price work from home playset, including video conference material, crying babies, and wine bottles. But we've seen that companies are now saying, well, maybe there's a fundamental shift here. Google says nobody should go back to the office until next summer. We see that, for example, Twitter said no employee should ever go back to the office, which is exactly what Microsoft said. This fluidity is a societal bigger trend that we're seeing. And it's not easy, but you also see the creativity. This is a Dutch example that I loved, where Dutch restaurant owners would put greenhouses in front of their restaurants so people could enjoy a corona-proof meal. In every type of crisis, there are people who hope to go back to the old normal as quickly as possible. And then there are those who see this as an opportunity to lock on to the new normal, to do a step change to take advantage of that. And I think this is going to be the true test of companies. Are they agile enough to take advantage of that super fluidity? The second characteristic in this never normal is that nobody stays in their lane anymore. Linear is completely out. At the Consumer Electronics Show in January of this year, we had Sony, who makes TVs, who introduced us to the concept of a new car. Sony was making a car. And at the same time, we saw Toyota, who makes cars, introducing us to the woven city, a vision of the future where cities have environments where cars don't even function anymore. How crazy is that? If you look at the world of technology, we have the biggest e-commerce retailer in the West, which is actually the biggest cloud provider on the planet. And maybe my favorite example is in finance, where Ping An, who is the largest insurance company in China, is reinventing itself as a healthcare platform player. Nobody stays in their swimming lane anymore. And what it means is that we're in an environment, which is the third characteristic, is that things move faster than ever before. We're seeing ultra speed. And the last 8 months were a great example of that. We saw business transform into winners and losers, best of times, worst of times. I mean, this is probably the craziest graph of 2020. The market value of Zoom, $48 billion, compared to the market cap of 7 of the largest airlines combined. And Zoom was worth more. And the reason is very simple. We all stopped flying. This is flight patterns over Europe in 2019 and in 2020. We stopped flying, so the airlines need less planes. So what we see is that the ripple effect goes on. Airbus is going to slash 15,000 jobs. They are going to order less engines, so Rolls-Royce is going to cut 9,000 jobs. Clearly, losers. At the same time, the winners. I mean, the rise of e-commerce has been more than spectacular in the last 8 months. The CEO of Shopify said, our wildest dreams for 2030 have been pulled into 2020. The rise of e-commerce gave a huge boost in logistics. And what we've seen is incredible movement and, I think, acceleration in those areas. So winners and losers, clearly a sign of disruption, but I think the biggest shifts is to come in the next decade. And I think, we all know that startups are going to take advantage of that. But what about traditional companies? And I became fascinated in the last couple of years on how traditional companies can reinvent itself or not reinvent itself. This is one of my favorite quotes from Hemingway. When he was asked, how did you go bankrupt? He said, well, 2 ways. First, gradually, and then suddenly. And I think this is going to be interesting because whenever I talk to banks, many will say, yes, oh, never normal, very sure, but not for us. And I think we are seeing that we're now in a situation where many of the smaller startups are actually beginning to play a major role in this changing never normal landscape. I take Adyen as an example, a Dutch startup in payment processing. This is an article from 2018 where they talk about Adyen and saying it's worth more than Deutsche Bank. That was basically in 2018. In 2020, what you have is the market cap of Adyen is more than double that of Deutsche Bank. As a matter of fact, if you add up, for example, an ING and a Deutsche Bank, you're not even reaching the market cap of Adyen. So we're getting into a very interesting storm, I think, in finance, which has been, relatively, I think, secure for a long time. And how can companies reinvent themselves? How can they actually become stronger? And I think this is where you have to make a big distinction between, on the one hand, what I call robustness, which is the ability to keep operating even in a crisis like COVID. And then there is that aspect of resilience, the capability to bounce back and even become stronger as a result. And I think a lot of the banks that I've seen have become so much focused on being robust that they have neglected, to develop their resilience and their agility. And I think this is exactly what we need to look at. As I said, some companies have done very well. This is the Financial Times top 100 companies who prospered during the pandemic, and this is the top 15. They're all technology companies. These are the companies that grew their market cap during the pandemic, and some companies spectacularly so. Look at the list. Most are US companies, some Chinese, one Canadian. So is a technology company the only recipe to be immune for this never normal? No, but the top technology companies did incredibly well. I mean, look at the top technology companies. We've seen the stocks rise during 2020. My favorite was basically Apple, who closed their physical stores and their sales went up. How spectacular is that? So what does it mean for the new players, the new kids on the block? And the last 10 years, it was very fashionable, especially in an audience like this, to applaud the unicorns. I think what we're now seeing is that the unicorns are separating. The unicorns were not immune to the pandemic. Airbnb will probably IPO in the next couple of days or weeks, but the CEO said it took us 12 years to build and we almost lost everything in 6 weeks. I think what we're beginning to see is that, of course, some of the Asian examples, Ant Financials, that was going to be the biggest IPO ever, and now it's the biggest suspended IPO ever. But actually, some of the changing patterns of behavior are actually not very good for some of the tech players out there and some of the fintech startups. Look at companies like Revolut or Monzo, who relied on people using their credit card, but if we travel less, that actually doesn't pan out into profitability for these opportunities. So I think after a decade of applauding the unicorns, I think it might be different to look at another opportunity, and this is what I call the Phoenix. The Phoenix are traditional companies, banks, financial institutions, insurance companies reinventing themselves. And a great example of a Phoenix in technology was Microsoft. I mean, everybody thought Microsoft was pretty much dead 10 years ago. It was a boring company. Now Microsoft is growing like crazy. And as Satya Nadella said, they did 2 years in 2 months in 2020. So what is this roller coaster ride of the never normal, and what is the opportunity for traditional companies? Well, let me take it into one particular market, which is retail. I think retail is one of the most exciting markets out there, and we know who the unicorn is. I mean, Amazon has single-handedly transformed the world of retail. But let me take you to the other side. 3 years ago, I was introduced to Walmart. I'd never been there. Walmart is the biggest traditional retailer in the world, 2.5 million employees, headquartered in Northwest Arkansas, in Bentonville, and for me, the example of a Phoenix. Let me show you a few examples. These are the pickup towers. These are amazing technology, pylons put into every Walmart. You buy something on the Walmart app, you go to a Walmart, you go to the kiosk and connect to the warehouse, your parcel is delivered within 10 seconds. And not just for room temperature, for frozen and cold storage as well. You say, okay, I don't have time to go to a Walmart. Fine. This is the Walmart in-home shopping app where you buy something on the app. A Walmart associate comes to your house and delivers the goods, can unlock your smart door, enter your house and put the stuff inside, and even stuff your refrigerator with the things that you've purchased online. I love this. I think it's amazing. You can follow everything that happens in your house because they have a camera. Some people say, I don't like that. I want some strange human being in my house. Fine, we'll send a robot. I mean, this is a great example of a company that is now innovating at breakneck speed. And for me, they are a great example of a Phoenix. They launched Walmart Plus, the answer to Amazon Prime, in full pandemic. Now, being a Phoenix is much more difficult than doing a unicorn because you have to drag the whole company behind you. And I think this is one of the fascinating things. It's a lot more difficult to actually change that big tanker, but those are the opportunities. And I am really interested to see who are going to be the big fintech phoenixes that we're going to see in the next decade. One thing is clear, if you keep applying the same old results, it's not going to work. So you need to have an eye on what I call the day after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow is a model I've been using for some time. How much time do we spend on today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow? What's today? It's the hundreds of emails and the dozens of Zoom calls. What's tomorrow? Next year's budget. I love budget season in large companies. The budget season, budgets are a yearly sarcastic ritual in which people put fake news into Excel that is consolidated into something which never works. And then there's the day after tomorrow, new ideas, new business models, new technologies that basically change the rule of the game. If you ask people how much time do you spend on that, they say, oh, 70, 20, 10. Reality is 93, 7, and 0. And the problem is value. Today is very important, tomorrow is very important, but the day after tomorrow is crucial if you want to reinvent yourself. The problem with most banks is that's not the complete model. Most banks have this added to that. This is what I call the shit of yesterday that they have to clean up, which is creating negative value. So I believe that if you want to be a phoenix in fintech, you have to balance and spend more time on the day after tomorrow, not just know, but actually act on it. So what does it mean? You need a strategy for the never normal. And to illustrate that, I think what we've seen, and not just in fintech, but in the larger community, all these new players have basically raised the bar in terms of customer expectation. The new Olympic minimum on customer experience has been set by the new kids on the block. They not just know their customer, KYC, they really know their customer. And I think this is something which many of the banks still have to do. Yes, they have KYC, but they don't really know their customer. And I think what they need to do beyond that is not just know, but really help your customer. Today, we're seeing that the rise of platforms are a new 21st century economic reality. And platforms seem to be attracting users like magnets, but actually it's the other way around. It's users who willingly actually feed information to the beasts. I take Waze as an example. I love Waze. Every time I use Waze, I gladly supply them with information because they get smarter, but they give me value in return. We're feeding the beast. And in the beginning, these beasts are nice and fluffy and warm and cuddly, and then we feed it too much information and they turn into the dangerous platforms. But it is the new reality. This remains one of my favorites. The light blue line is the total number of SMSs of all the mobile operators in the world, all the T-Mobiles and Vodafones, and the dark blue is the number of messages on WhatsApp. And if you ask Vodafone in 2010, knowing this, and they were printing money with SMS, I mean, did you have a good year? They said, yes, very good year. And if you ask them what's going to happen next, they say, oh, we think this is going to happen. And it didn't. I mean, the real disruption is what happens right there. We're now seeing that this is escalating. The concept of a dump pipe, they connect you, but they don't actually capture any value, has been happening in telco. This is now happening in banking and in finance as well. So if you want to reinvent yourself and have a strategy for the never normal, it's not enough to be essential for your customers. You have to be relevant. So how are you combining those two? Look at, for example, what WhatsApp has been doing in Brazil this summer by putting payments into their messaging app. How can you actually be essential and be relevant in the never normal? That's the first thing, strategy. The second thing is you also need to think about structure. If there's one thing that I've seen is that there is the rainforest and the plantation. Traditional banks and insurance companies are like plantation. They focus. And then there are the fintechs who are in the rainforest. And the rainforest is really scary. You get bitten by a spider and you're dead. Just like a fintech has a 95% chance of dying. And if you're a bank, sometimes you say, you know what, there's stuff happening in the rainforest, let's buy a fintech startup. And you know what happens? If you take something that's lived in the rainforest all its life and you drag it into the plantation, it dies. And it's not because of innovation. It's because the culture in the plantation, the rainforest, is fundamentally different. What you basically see is that you have to understand the rules of engagement from the two sides if you really want to understand how to make that happen. So maybe you need to think about a completely new structure altogether. Let me introduce you to the hourglass model. You all know what an hourglass looks like. This is an organization, and the top of the hourglass, this is where you do your wide lens day after tomorrow. This is where you then experiment and use psychological safety to try things. That top of the hourglass, I think this is basically your insurance policy to look at the future. This is what I call the sense and try that companies need to do in order to look at their day after tomorrow. And then it falls into the bottom part of the hourglass. And the bottom part of the hourglass, this is where you basically scale and run for efficiency. Now think about this in your company. How much and what percentage of your company is focused on sense and try, and what percentage is focused on scale and run? And I meet a lot of companies which have less than 1% of their activities in the top and 99% in the bottom. And I don't think that will work anymore in the never normal. You need to combine both. It's very interesting because there's now a lot of debate about this. Safi Bakal wrote an interesting book on this called Loonshots. I had a chance to work with him over the summer. He says, in a company you have soldiers and you have armies. And the soldiers are the one who do the scale and run. And the artists have this, vision for the day after tomorrow. You need to combine both. And you need to fit them into a structure. What we're beginning to see is that armies of soldiers and artists don't, really mix. You have to separate the phases. But at the same time, you need to make sure that there's a lot of cooperation between the two, a dynamic equilibrium. There are many companies in the past who've done that completely wrong. I mean, I'm in the Apple Chapel. A great example is actually what happened in that world. Xerox, who invented photocopying, said, no, we have to look at the future. They sent their smartest people to California in Palo Alto, who created Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, and they developed everything that we have today. Graphical user interface, personal computer, the mouse, Ethernet laser printer, and they never did anything with that. Apple basically stole their technology and all their people. First they made the Lisa, then the Macintosh, and Steve Jobs convinced them by saying it's more fun to be a pirate than to be in the Navy. So that's a bad example. But for me, a great example is actually what is happening right now in the world of cloud. Amazon is the biggest e-commerce retailer in the West. Amazon Web Services is the biggest cloud provider by far. This is a great example of where they were able to actually separate, the artists and the soldiers, but still keep that common ground to make them effective. The last thing is you need to think about the culture for the never normal. Companies have to embrace this. I think in this world of constant change, you have to be bold on the vision, but I think you have to be flexible in the details. And let me share with you finally a recipe. I've coined it vaccine. I think this is maybe a mechanism to cope with this never normal. It's an incorrectly spelled 6-letter word. The V is for velocity. I think the world is moving faster. You have to move faster. I love this quote from Mario Andretti. It's probably a bad quote for a Formula One driver, but he said, if everything seems under control, you're just not going fast enough. And we've all seen the hospital in Wuhan being constructed in just 10 days. 10 days. That's the speed that we have to look at today. It's not just speed. I think agility might be even more important. I love the analogy of the whitewater kayaker, a really scary sport. When you look at it, you could be submerged and the water could crush you. But if you learn how to read the river, you can actually, use the power of the change to your advantage. Velocity and agility, we have to unlock the creative potential of everyone in the organization. We have to fire on all innovation cylinders. Product innovation and market innovation and service innovation and model innovation. Look at, for example, a company like Disney, reinventing itself as a subscriber company with Disney Plus, now more than 100 million subscribers, and they are completely changing their operating model, firing on all cylinders. And the last two is network and experimentation. We don't live in the digital age, we live in the age of networks. Stanley McChrystal already said it, it takes a network to fight a network. If the outside world becomes a network, you have to figure out how to run like a network. And the last one is experimentation. I think this is the time for psychological safety, where you can enable people to take risks. I love this quote from Mandela, I never fail, I either win or I learn. And I think this is going to be crucial. If a company wants to be a phoenix and wants to dramatically increase innovation, they will have to incredibly lower the cost of failure. This is no longer the time where you wait for the final HBR article and implement 7 steps. It doesn't work anymore. This is no longer the time of basically waiting for lessons learned. No, this is the time for lessons learning. We have to experiment as we go along. And I think this is where we can learn a lot from the startups. I'm a perennial optimist, but I think we do have to turn it all the way up to 11. Let me end with this quote. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. If you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. I can only wish you a lot of success in the never normal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I almost wanted to hear, the St. Peter, square applause, to this presentation. But metaphorically, from me, you had it. Okay,
thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
And of course, there is nothing more than told to me about accepting, different sort of resources and talents and go for disruptive rather than incremental innovation. I know that you have been preaching this, for over a decade, if not more, and now it must be a message that the larger the old style corporate is, the most complicated is for them to accept it, isn't it?
It is, but I think I wanted to deliberately use the Walmart example because when I was talking about this over the last couple of years, many people said to me, yes, you're probably right. But, we work in a very old, very traditional, very large company. It's very difficult to do it. So I said, I always get that question. You know what? Let's go to the biggest company in the world. And to see Walmart actually reinventing itself to be a real competitor to Amazon was really invigorating. And now at least I can say, if the largest company in the world can do it, why can't you do it?
It's a great way to wrap you up, Peter. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you again. Stay tuned.
My pleasure. Bye-bye, Matteo.
Bye. And now back to Michele. Michele, who is going to be next?
Next, okay. First of all, Peter and Matteo were very inspiring. That's the word for me. So now we have here with us Louise Brett. Louise is a senior partner in Deloitte Digital and she leads the UK FinTech response for Deloitte. She has advised government bodies in the UK FinTech strategy. She worked with clients to find and engage FinTechs and constitutes a pillar of Deloitte FinTech network. Louise, please.
Thank you. Buon pomeriggio, I think I say at this time of day in your country. And I wish I was in your country. I am speaking to you from London, England. And I'm going to give you a few minutes on the perspective from sitting in the UK, possibly the world's largest global fintech hub. It has a few contenders for that, but just wanted to talk through exactly how we're seeing fintech, and to Peter's very inspiring and exciting speech, what is happening on the ground. If we look at 2019, 2020, what have we seen? So I wanted to start with actually a bit of history on fintech, on the fact that in 2008, we went through the global financial crisis, and fintech was seen as perhaps a salve to some real problems that emerged at that time. And that really was the start of the fintech scene. We have just put out a video or a film rather, with BBC Storyworks. And in that, we have coined it from crisis to catalyst. And I think that's what we are now really seeing, this fintech being the catalyst potentially for economic recovery from a pandemic that has shocked us all and was certainly not anticipated. If I look at the UK, the scale of fintech is often overshadowed by London being such a global financial centre. And historically, it definitely had a strength in that you could have policymakers, regulators, headquartered global banks and fintechs all within a 15-minute tube journey of each other. Well, right now we don't do tube journeys, not really, and proximity doesn't seem to be that important. Certainly, COVID-19 has given us the understanding that digital connectivity and liquidity of information is absolutely the power and the powerhouse of how we are going to be successful in the future. So if we look at the UK, yes, London is a major contributor, and we have a very thriving fintech scene, but we also have recently undergone some analysis to find there are, in fact, 25 different fintech clusters within the UK, 10 of which are full of high growth fintechs. And we firmly believe that that is where the future growth from the market and from the fintech economy is going to drive economic recovery. And I'll come on to at the areas where we see that. So, thank you. So the UK fintech investment has risen to new records. In 2019, we saw record levels of investment, and certainly by 2020, in quarter three, we've seen over 10 billion of investment coming into the sector. It is this kind of investment, and with liquidity of information, as I mentioned before, where investors and global capital will find where it best wants to get its returns, and that will drive the economic prosperity. There is a word of caution, however. When we look at growth capital for the fintechs that are going to really scale and become the global category leaders, the modelling we have done in the UK, which came out in a global capital report only last month, showed a deficit of 15 billion in the year of growth capital. So we have the innovation, as Peter was talking about, we have the appetite and the talent, but we absolutely need to focus on growth capital to really underpin that and give us the success that we're all looking for. When we look at Europe, we can see that we are recovering from the pandemic already, that in 2020 VC activity you'll see, and that's only partway through. We've done 10 billion in the last quarter. We believe that this will be another record for the industry. That is really exciting in terms of where this can drive the economy and become the enabler that we believe fintech will be. We are seeing a lot of ongoing innovation in R&D, in data, the universities and the accelerators really focusing on programs that can really drive this appetite going forward and make us super successful. And I think it's in the partnering, and Peter talked about this too, of how fintech and heritage organizations, both in the financial services space and beyond, can come together and co-create around the future. So where do we think it's going to really look interesting? We've pulled out 4 areas here where we think these sectors, these subsectors in fintech are driving huge change. It's worth saying that, of course, the context has changed. Consumers' appetites, consumers' behaviors have become very, very different. There is 60% less cash being withdrawn in the UK because of the pandemic. Unsurprising. Perhaps a little more surprising is that 6 million people downloaded a banking app to do digital banking for the first time in the first few months of the pandemic. Pretty universally, those digital bank app users are saying they will not go back to their old ways of banking. So we are seeing consumer attitudes hugely change. We're also seeing corporates change. Working for Deloitte, I spend many hours speaking to my clients about how they're digitally going to transform their businesses. And one CEO said to me right at the beginning of the pandemic, what you've been talking to us about for the last 12 months, we've had to do in a week. And I think that appetite to be agile and change has suddenly transformed the C-suite agendas, and operational resilience, embracing agility and being able to move quickly to cope for any other future shocks is now right at the heart of the agenda. So we look at the 4 areas I've pulled out here. So payments have been hugely successful as people have found different ways to pay, and increasingly now the buy now, pay later opportunities that are being made available. There is a watch for this one though, because there is a backstory on financial inclusion and financial literacy, that whilst digital is making and fintech is making financial services much more accessible, so perhaps it's making it much more confusing with the proliferation of many different types of alternatives out there. Certainly if you go on the JD Sports website to buy, there is at least 8 categories of payment types you can use to actually pay for your goods. So again, advancement perhaps, but with a bit of caution to make sure it's inclusive advancement, as my colleague Elena said at the outset. Insurtech has been seen, or insurance has been seen as the laggard industry. We've seen in the pandemic and driving through to recovery, Insurtech really coming to the fore, which is very exciting for an industry that is revolutionizing itself. Trading, of course, in volatility, then trading is where people want to be, to have fintechs that focus on trading opportunities and maybe trading through to wealth management as well. 35% of new fintechs in the UK are in the wealth management space. And then finally, digital processes, be it reg tech, secure tech, fintechs helping digitize the processes in the largest organizations are being embraced, not only as suppliers of solutions, but also as partners. And we believe very much that as this pandemic lessens, and as we come back to a world that is not just virtual, it does get physical as well, we will see a lot of the advancements of fintech really be taken on to new hybrid models of how we can virtually reach both capital, consumers and talent, and then together really advance the recovery. So I think I leave a message of hope that fintech can be a real driver, but not in isolation, in partnership with the heritage organisations that frankly are the building blocks of their success to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, for your precise and forward-looking report. Now it's time for our own roundtable, moderated by our FinTech leader, Paolo Gianturco. Paolo.
Thank you, Michele. Good afternoon, and I'm very excited to host the 5th edition of FinTech Talk, and also excited because of the new or never normal, as Peter said, because we are doing everything full digital, and so I want to thank all speaker people and guests that are following us to this afternoon. Before welcoming the speakers, I just want to say a first thing that I completely agree with Peter about the never normal. I think that we need to think about a continuous transformation of our business and operational model. And in this roundtable, as you can see, as you can see in the video, we want to talk about investment. FinTech were impacted by the COVID, as other industries, as well as about the change in the macro and micro conditions. But also we see that COVID dramatically changed the digital acceleration. And so today we want to talk with our speaker about the new COVID paradigm, how this paradigm change the FinTech today and also the FinTech in the future. So please, I want to welcome the speaker we have today. I want to thank all of you. We have Claire Carmejan, Chief Innovation Officer of Sogen, representing incumbents. Then we have Marco Giorgino, full professor of Politecnico di Milano and director of the University Observatory of FinTech and InsurTech, that I'm very happy to be part and to contribute. Hi, Marco.
Hi, Paolo.
And finally, we have Ignazio, who is the CEO, Ignazio Rocco, who is the CEO of and founder of a very important startup, Credimi, representing the startup. Hi, Ignazio.
Hi.
So I have the first question is for all of you, and the question is very simple to answer in 2 minutes. It's about how the investment, how the FinTech are managing the challenges of COVID today, how they were impacted by the COVID, and how do you see in the future, after this pandemic situation, how do you think the fintech will manage the new or the never normal, as Peter said? So please, Claire, can you give us your idea and your opinion about this impact on fintech and the future of fintech after COVID?
Sure. In terms of investment, I think it's way early, to be honest, to completely say what is the impact on fintech investment. What we can observe, at least in Société Générale, we've maintained all our engagement with the different startups and investments that we have done, and we've kept investing through COVID-19 as we are seeing some acceleration of some of the usage. I think more broadly, and Peter talked about it with Unfinancial, we can see that as fintech is getting bigger, they've started to position themselves as a technology company, providing finance as a secondary service. And what we can observe is somehow it's catching up. So example of Wirecard, but also what have happened with Western Union and with Unfinancial, I think are early signal of something that it will be a bit more robust in terms of monitoring part of the fintech which are touching bank as a service. And in SocGen, what we have done is we did the acquisition of Trésor, which is one of the leader of bank as a service in Europe. And this acquisition, which was done 2 years ago, and I supervise directly Trésor. When we bought Trésor, it was supplying 10 fintech in France. Today, Trésor is deployed in 8 countries, supply 70 clients, neobanks, cards type of services, and more and more corporate and big tech, which are asking part of these services, and have grown from 35 people to 120 people, and went through all the process of compliance and adapting their KYC, payment services, and everything to the standard of Société Générale. And so I think the story is going to be different as we move forward in terms of this banking as a service layer and provider of the technological infrastructure, which become more and more a major trend as the technology is maturing, especially in payments. Now, where fintech have a lot of room and can deploy is still, with COVID, the new usage we are seeing, especially in e-commerce, where more and more innovation, new technology is emerging. But to conclude, really in the investment side, personally, I think it's way too early to see. I am not sure COVID-19 had an impact for early stage, like when Brexit happened, a couple of fintech early stage may had some term sheet and some funds, were dealing a little bit their investment across the patch. But what I have observed is mostly a valuation, which are, still maintained very high. Again, maintained by trends we can see in e-commerce, in payments, which are usage, which are growing as during COVID, most of the merchants are pushing transactions this way. Maybe just last but not least, but it's very interesting also to observe everything going on around retail CDBCs. So over COVID, Société Générale did a worldwide first transaction with an emission of covered bond, which was directly bought back by Banque de France and converted in digital euro as part of an experiment. And this was done, in the middle of the crisis. So nothing stopped it. And we can see that, the ECB have launched a CDBC retail consultation, and the digital yuan is live. So again, just give us some further clue about the acceleration in the sector.
Very clear. So we see a very good future for fintech, and I completely agree. Ignazio, what's your view on fintech impacts from COVID?
Hi, Paolo. Good afternoon. Well, there is the never normal as we said, let me underline that the never normal can also be seen as negatively, especially if you mentioned the never normal about somebody. Like I'm sure my wife would describe me as never normal, for example. So let's be careful about how we handle this never normal thing. And what happened with the COVID? I believe it's about, as far as fintech firms are concerned, accelerated growth, accelerated change in consumer behavior, and also accelerated competition. Accelerated growth because, especially in the first phase of the pandemic, most consumers, whether it be individuals or businesses or small businesses, they found themselves in sudden need of completely remote transaction and service, and completely remote and completely available services and transactions, and also they found themselves in need of something with a lot of speed and with very quick access to liquidity in our case. So, for example, in the case of CreditMe, we saw loan applications grow 10 times in a couple of the peaks of the pandemic. And the need to interact with financial services providers remotely, which is actually what all fintechs do, grew very, very strongly and very suddenly. So this is one. We also have seen accelerated change in consumer behavior, in the sense that, as many have said, in a few months, many consumers have started to get habits and change behaviors in a way that would have taken years. In our specific case of small business lenders, the thing that is most impressive is how all small businesses are starting to get into e-commerce, to get into CRM, and to get into digital marketing. This is there to stay, and you can see that such companies as Shopify or Wix have tripled their value. But it will also have an impact on fintech, because as small businesses start to transact in a different way, then many financial services will also become embedded in these transactions. Shopify is already a significant provider of capital, but you will see many other bundles and actually pop-ups of new animal species in this space. And the third is accelerated competition, because the need to transact online and to serve customers online has been immediately also understood by banks. So what banks would have done probably in 3 to 5 years is happening at accelerating speed, which will mean that the whole frontier of things that can be done digitally will be shifted forward, and we will see much more change in these coming quarters. So I would say it's these three things: accelerated growth, accelerated change in consumer behaviors, and accelerated competition.
I completely agree with you. First, about being close to suffering people, so we should manage with carefully everything. But also, I agree about the 3 points, and especially about the last one, the competition, because of digital services that are cross-border. So I think that also the investment will be impacted by the new competition. Thank you very much, Ignazio. Marco, what's your opinion about fintech? And also, thanks to your job in Observatory in Politecnico.
Thank you, Paolo. Thanks again for your kind invitation to be here again in the FinTech Talks organized by Deloitte. I can say that I totally agree with the people that spoke before, because many of the things are absolutely shared also by myself, and I totally agree. What we see looking at our observatory at Politecnico di Milano, and for sure, there's been a digital surge fostered by the pandemic that is speeding up a transformation in finance that is now more than ever under a reshape. We heard some magic words like acceleration, like growth, like partnerships, like resilience. We see how all these things are happening, are occurring. And some trends can confirm this. First of all, the shift from physical to digital payments this year has been really dramatic. And the share of cashless transactions worldwide has risen to levels that we were expecting for in 2 to 5 years, not before, but this was the prediction before the pandemic. Someone before my intervention talked about 2 years in 2 months. Yes, it happened. 2 years in 2 months, a very, very deep acceleration in digitization that is the most visible, in particular in payments, but not only in payments. Because digitization is also raising ahead in other areas of finance, in particular the core banking, and we saw also here in Italy, and Ignazio was talking about that, about different behaviors by customers. Lenders report surging connections to their hubs and digital sales. And digital finance really had brought a lot of people into the banking system in recent months. Also, if these changes in behavior sometimes seem likely to stick. But many customers we know were unfamiliar with this, with the technology before the pandemic. Now they are more familiar and they seem to like it. And we will present some data tomorrow morning in our annual meeting of the Observatory of FinTech and InsurTech at Politecnico di Milano. Let me give you a view about how capital markets are pricing all those phenomena. Capital markets think a new era is downing, and the flows of investments are moving around that. If we look at the top 500 global banks, payment firms, and fintech, we see how conventional banks today account for only 72% of the total market capitalization. At the beginning of the year, the number was 81%, and some years ago was 96%. Fintech firms count for 11%, and they had doubled their value since the beginning of the year, reaching something close to $900 billion. And conventional non-bank payments firms are booming too, and we saw what happened some weeks ago also in Italy, where a major player announced some M&A deals. So what we see in the middle of the digital rush, a new business model is seeming to consolidate. We see how banks, e-commerce sites, fintechs, social networks, other corporations like telco companies are all vying to become platforms, to become marketplaces through which users can buy a range of products, both made in-house and by third parties. And it seems how investors are reckoning that embedded finance, so the integration between credit and insurance and investment into not financial apps or websites, could in time become as valuable as payment services are today. Let me conclude with a final consideration, the role of data. And we saw what happened some hours ago, the announcement of Standard & Poor's that announced to buy IHS Markit, and this is the second most important deal in all the industries since the beginning of the year, $44 billion. So the role of data, how data are important. And I think that in this phase, in this very critical phase that we are living, there is a very important consideration that most of the operators are really perceive in practice, really in practice. The more people share their daily lives with banks, the more banks can give them additional benefits using data. And Peter Hinson was talking about really know your customer, not know your customer. We have to know our customers in deep in order to understand really what do they need and how to design products that could be fitting expectation they do have. A final comment. I think that the pandemic showed that the new and the old, so incumbent and fintechs can coexist. With the precise features of the hybrid system, we have to look for a new set of hybrid systems. I think this is a very important occasion to go beyond the dichotomy between incumbent and fintechs. And I think taking the words that Peter Hinson used, we need to understand if banks could be not only robust, but also resilient. And this phase is a very occasion to do this. And I think this is very linked to a very important transformation that banks could live, that is to become fintechs themselves.
Thank you, Marco. Very clear. I think that your numbers confirm that there is an acceleration in the last month. And also, this is interesting, the data point, because at least the second question could be how many data fintech can handle, or fintech and incumbents can handle. And just to conclude your opinion, another question for you, Marco. We talked, Ignazio, Claire, about investment, acceleration, innovation. But what do you think about innovation in Europe and Italy? Because when we think about innovation, disruptive innovation, we think about Silicon Valley, as Alain showed in the first speech. But I think that your work and the work of Claire, Ignazio, and other people in the community is accelerating our position as European. Do you agree or not about this?
I totally agree. I totally agree. We had a gap, historically speaking, a gap in comparison with what happened in US. But today, I think we are filling the gap, and our numbers are confirming this, because if we take in consideration the number of startups that we have under our monitoring that are more than 2,500 all around the world, we see how the number in Europe is increasing dramatically. And it's not the same number that we still have in US, but is an increasing number. And this is for confirming what is your thesis. So Europe is doing better than what it did in the past. And I think it's important also to underline what's the role of the regulators, because we do not have to forget what happened in September this year when European Union announced the digital financial package that I think is important solution to foster what is the innovation, both considering incumbent and considering, let me say, startups or new ventures. But in order to accelerate, I want to point out a word that most of the speakers already talked before, that is the partnerships role. I think that if we want to increase the speed of the innovation inside the incumbent segment, we need to foster partnerships and integration among what's the old world and what is the new world. I think one of the most important sources of innovation for incumbent can derive from a stronger link they could generate with new companies, with fintechs. And I think today regulation can give a boost about that. And so I'm quite optimistic for the future.
Thank you, Marco. And I'm very happy that we can accelerate our innovation pace in Europe, in Italy. Ignazio, you started a very amazing and innovative company some years ago, and so we are sure that you are full of idea. And I'd like to understand from your dynamic entrepreneurial vision, what's the next innovative solution that you see in the fintech world in the future?
As we said before, in the small business world, all small businesses are going digital. And therefore, without getting into full details of what could happen because of that, we can be sure that the provider of financial services very quickly will be different than the providers we have today. If you actually sell digitally, and if you buy digitally, and if you transact digitally also related to your employees and to your other management of other expenses, and if your accounting is digital, then this means that most of the financial services transactions do not need to take place separately. The same notion of a loan is something which, if you think about it, is pretty outdated. There's no way I should take a loan, put the proceeds of a loan in a current account, keep the money lying there, and then spend it, and then gradually devolve back this loan in installments. This is all coming from a situation where this loan would actually be physically stored in a bank, but actually I can get finance exactly in the moment that I need it and in the channels where I need that finance. So that, I believe, is going to be one of the most important changes we will see pretty quickly coming in. There will be more changes in that some of the companies that will satisfy these new needs will themselves acquire a banking license. However, when we speak, for example, about when our moment will come to acquire a banking license, which is definitely something that we will do at some point, then people tell me this means you are transforming you into a bank. It's not exactly the same thing. Transforming into, depending what you mean with transforming into a bank. If transforming into a bank means you are going to offer a full range of different services to a full range of different customers with actually the kind of product and services and the business model of a bank, then I would say no. We are not transforming ourselves into a bank. But at the same time, if you look at Klarna, they do have a banking license, and it's important to have a banking license because a banking license means you can get your funding at a much lower cost. You can do many more things with a banking license in terms of paying services, PSD2 services, that you can do without a banking license. So they do have a banking license, but I wouldn't say they are a bank. They have a player which can operate as with the same rules and rights as a bank. And the third thing that I believe that I would say unfortunately will not happen in Europe, but I believe should happen, or at least that we should promote, is that the single thought of regulation which says a bank is as strong as it is bigger, and it has more and more capital, which means we should have banks consolidating with each other. So we have two large traditional banks, and then they got one traditional, even bigger bank. And we've got one bank in Germany and one bank in France, and then we have suddenly one bank covering Germany and France, but it is bigger. The single thought that this is actually making making banks more robust and making financial services safer is from my humble point of view, I wouldn't say it's wrong, but it's single-minded. There is much more work to do in making financial services more competitive on the one hand, and more resilient by being more innovative and by investing more into the change and adapting more to the change, which in my point of view, consolidation between traditional banks is something that consolidation does not help. But typically we have seen is something that consolidation even makes more difficult to some extent. That's a bit, out of my scope. It's just a final thought I wanted to add.
Thank you, Ignazio. Very clear, and also inspiring your points. And if I think about the third point, that is something could be a discussion. If we need to converge in few players, so to decentralize finance, helps me to ask Claire, also to conclude our roundtable, because of your position in a very important and large bank in Europe, and also because we know that, as you said before, and also because of your experience, that you know open banking concept and also open finance concepts. So my point, what's your view about open finance now in the future, and if you have anything interesting to share with us about new opportunities to decentralize or to support a sort of a decentralization with open finance?
Yeah, I was on mute. But sure, open finance, I think, is, it's just a way to go, because it's just a strategy that have been set up at the European agenda level. And so therefore, we'll just have to embrace it, that we like it or not. So, we had PSD2 that was putting the foundation of sharing some of the transaction data with the consent of the customer, because we have all to remember at the end of the day that the consumer data. And so, some countries have set up, as Louise was mentioning before, in the UK, the open banking regulation. In France and in most of the country where we operate, so Société Générale have about 7 different retail banks in Russia, Africa, Czech Republic, Romania, and France. So we have a large diversity. When we talk about open finance, we can see that definitely in Russia and in some of our Western European banks, more and more they start to aggregate part of external data in order to provide enhanced services to their customer base. In France, it's a bit different, but the digitalization and the customer behavior in France is also a bit different than what we can observe in the UK. Though we can expect that at one point, it will just catch up. So I think for me, open finance is just a reality, and that lands very well with what Marco was sharing in terms of his research and perspective, which is at the end of the day, where oil and banking have been leading the market capitalization of industries for a long time. Now platforms like Amazon and the big techs are the ones that are leading the world, and so to some extent led some revolution and evolution of the business model towards what we are calling platforms. Now, very practically, because open finance is only a mechanism towards this business model and sharing most of the data, my mission is split in two. So I have as much the acceleration of our current business model, which is to embrace digitalization and to harness AI and data towards a logical evolution that went from a digital channel to a digital first experience with digital sales and digital acquisition, to today having differentiating factors using the data with the consent of the customer and in the respect of what we are doing as banks, which is managing risk when it comes to your financial assets, and maybe tomorrow when it comes to your data actually, and that could be one of the projection. The other part is around creating new businesses. And here, I already mentioned the example of Trezor, which is just what Marco was mentioning again in the field of banking as a service and the embedded finance landscape and e-commerce. It's one of the same. It's the same area of how do we do that. And for us, about 2 years ago, we started this journey with this acquisition, and we've kept investing and growing this understanding within organization, within our group. Now we come to the business model of platforms. This is very hard because, we have to realize that it's switching completely the business model, which is being the producer of financial services and products and being our own distributor and basically monitoring all this value chain to a platform business model where you will have, producers and users which meet in a digital ecosystems and will create a new market. And that is a complete switch from redefining your business model and your value chain from a customer point of view. So I'm just totally aligned with Marco. We've started again this journey in SocGen. So, when you look at SocGen worldwide, and SocGen is very diversified, we have about 30 different embryonic platform which exist across the group. So some we did acquisition like Shine recently, which is a neobank for sole trader. We have some in ALD or car leasing business, which is providing ALD car market for reselling some of the cars, but also the way we think about electric vehicles and monetizing, switching part of the car leasing business to monetizing, maybe the OEM and moving to their new strategy, which is called Move 2025, which is basically an ecosystem which will be mostly digital to offer all these services to our customer and to adapt to the way they want to move to really what they are trying to do. So just another example, as I mentioned, there are about 30, so I can go on for a long time, but I think we are about reaching time. But what's more important in this platform play is to realize that at the end of the day, it's not likely a bank will be really able to go beyond the bank as a service by itself. I think bank as a service is accessible, embedded finance, it's fully on the trajectory, it's a shift of business model, but it's quite a natural one. The one of the platform play, like the Amazon play and etc., is just a little bit harder, and it's probably going to come from maybe banks working together, maybe banks working with fintech, banks working with big tech. It's for us the future of the bank is embedded. It's open in terms of the architecture and in terms of the way we do it. And again, we started that for a little while, but it's also going to be rooted within the business of banking, and so keep having the same risk management and adjacent to what we are doing today. We don't see a completely radical shift or other need in the next 10 to 15 years. So one of the main impact, and that will be my last point, is obviously everything around climate change, climate transition, energy transition, and building towards a more responsible and durable world, which is part of the North Star ambitions that Société Générale define itself. So, that's a full new way to open this conversation, to open finance and responsible data.
Thank you, Claire. Very clear. So, if I can summarize in 3 words our opinion, your opinion in this roundtable, they could be acceleration, digital, and collaboration. And if you remember, I think that you remember 4 or 5 years ago when we talked about incumbents and fintech, the situation was very different. So I'm very happy that even if we are in a drama like this pandemic, on the other hand, we can see something also good in the transformation. So I really thank you all for accepting to be here today with us, I'm sure that your opinion, your comments were very inspiring for all of us. And so I give the stage to Michele. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo, and to our speakers, Claire, Ignazio, and Marco. Now, I would like to introduce you to Roberto Nicastro, banker and FinTech investor. His curriculum is very long, so I try to read it. So he's been vice chairman of UBI Banca, advisor of one of the leading global private equity, general manager of UniCredit, chairman of EFMA, and vice chairman of ABI, and today he's a fintech entrepreneur. Roberto will lecture us how he's building a neobank from scratch. Hi, Roberto.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation. Will it be question and answer? No, okay, good. So, thanks very much. I'm happy to tell a little bit about what we've been doing with IDEXA. Together with Federico Sforza, former colleague of mine in UniCredit, we've decided some time ago to launch an SME challenger bank aiming to address the needs of small and medium enterprises. Italy is a country, as you know, that has one of the largest world pool of SMEs. There are 7 million players. And in my past experience, we felt that the type of services that banks do offer to them is not so adequate compared to their needs. It's not just a matter of a price or a matter of receiving enough credit. It's mainly a matter of receiving a service that is fast enough, quick, with the type of user experience that we increasingly get accustomed to by working with the Amazon of this world. And as a result, we decided to do that without legacies of being a bank, but leveraging on what the technology can offer. So IDEXA that we founded is a digital bank. Sorry, at the moment is not a bank yet. It's one of 6, but has applied to become a bank, to have a banking license. That leverages on artificial intelligence, on machine learning. It's really created as a data-driven company. It's a company that starts in cloud from day zero, and with the enormous advantage of not having the typical sandbags that a bank would have in terms of core banking systems. Clearly, an important element for launching IDEXA in this point in time is the advantages that open banking is providing. Open banking is for us is a major breakthrough in terms of the possibility to offer a service to customer that is truly competitive, to open up also lending on top of payment competition to entrepreneurs, and within this frame, what we expect is the possibility for many customers to have a much broader lending and variety of products. To launch IDEXA, we have raised close to 50 million euro of capital. which has been one of the largest seed rounds for FinTech in Europe in these last years, having as a part of the capital players such as the Generali Group, the Sella Group, IFIS, a number of venture capitalists, as well as angel investors. And we're very happy to have involved in the project also Confartigianato, which is the confederation of 800,000 Italian artisans, as well as Medio Credito Centrale, which is the bank that is in charge of managing the guarantee scheme for small businesses in Italy today. And as you know, especially after COVID, the provision of financing with government-assisted schemes has become a major feature of the SME lending in Italy and Europe-wide. Some of the beauties of for somebody that has been in banking with gray hair, as I am, for many years, is discovering that what was said outside, that the amount of legacies you typically depend once you are in a once you work in a bank is absolutely true. Often by having to depend on a core banking system or on skills and competencies that are not in line with what you would like to have, you grow a bit disillusioned, you grow a bit resigned that it's impossible to do innovation without putting on the table millions and millions of euros, or without having to wait months, if not years. In the case of IDEXA, I can witness that we started with the very first year of the project at the beginning of July, and we were able to deliver the first product to the first customers only 4 months after, already with a user experience that is way better than what I remember was possible to do within the bank. For instance, providing the credit answer in real time rather than the typical 3 to 6 weeks that a bank would normally require. And with a cost of developing the service and the product that is a small fraction of what you typically would have to go through the moment in which instead you have to build up the innovation on top of the core banking system. Now IDEXA is starting with short-term lending. This is the first product, is an instant lending product. And later on, the plan, however, is to move towards making of IDEXA a fully SME-focused challenger bank. And as I said, we have already started the process to become a regulated player. This in the full awareness, in the full conviction that regulation and fintech that in the past were almost seen as very different things, in fact, would go towards a convergence. Fintech very often has to do with the savings of customers, with elements that require a lot of trust by customers. It's difficult to consider fintech continuing to be mainly unregulated. On the other hand, the challenge for regulators and for regulation is to become less tight. So what I expect as a future is a market in which we'll have less tight regulation, but much broader, where with very interesting new challenges arriving. Last example within this frame is the challenge of how to manage artificial intelligence versus regulation. Artificial intelligence is fantastic, especially for somebody who wants to lend to a small business company. On the other hand, you cannot think, neither as a board nor as a regulator, that you can just develop fantastic algorithms and then use that as a black box. If you have to take responsibility, you must learn how to read the artificial intelligence. You probably have to build also by leveraging on streetwise people who did small business lending for decades, and really as a combination arrive to a product that is way superior to whatever was available up to now, but also readable, something on which both a board and a regulator can fully rely on. Thanks very much for this opportunity. Yes.
Thank you so much, actually. And I know that 5 minutes to talk of such a big project is a challenge. I do think that your ecosystem approach, including this confederation, the Italian Confederation of Small and Medium Businesses, is actually very smart. I'm pretty sure that we're going to hear a lot more about IDEX in the future. Roberto, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for you.
So let's actually go to the last panel of the day. The topic is rather challenging, is open finance and AI. And I have with me Paola Papanicolaou, Group Head of Innovation of Intesa Sanpaolo, and Laurent Descoux, founder and CEO of Neo. But the website is GetNeo. So please, I welcome them on my screen. Welcome, Paolo. Welcome, Laurent. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So let's try to reproduce a little bit like a normal conversation. So we will actually be the three of us on the screen. I explain who you are. From time to time, you will get your moment of, the spotlight, so we can apparently display your title as well. But Paola, why don't you tell us and the world a little bit more, your background and what you do in Intesa Sanpaolo.
Hello, Matteo. Hello, everybody. Very nice to be here. I'm the Group Head of Innovation in Intesa, and my experience actually comes from business. So I've been for several years in private banking, and the last 2 years I'm working within the Chief IT Digital and Innovation Officer department, and I'm the Head of Innovation, and we're leading with my team. We're 70 people within Intesa, and we're leading the innovation project. So we act as internal consultants to lead and guide and realize innovative projects, which are not only related with technology, but also with innovative business models within the Intesa group.
Thank you, Paola. Laurent, we just heard about someone who built a neobank for SME from scratch. Sounds like you know a thing or two about it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Hi, everyone. My name is Laurent. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Neo. Neo is an international bank account for mid-sized corporate, European mid-sized corporates who wants to be able to deal simply with their collections and their payments cross-border. We're effectively, we have the stamp of a so-called neobank, so I totally identify and share probably some of the comments that were shared to the round table before, and say that we're very happy to be here today to talk more about neobanks and how this new way of new technology can put a revolution in the banking industry.
Thank you. Actually, I like even the setting of this. I mean, despite the fact I don't like that my square is a little bit bigger. I should be small and you guys should be a team. But apparently, I can't do much about it. But we have on one side, one of these very big ships that Peter showed in his presentation that is rather difficult to steer. Okay, and on the other side, if we take the same image, a much smaller boat that is supposed to be more agile. So, with these two sort of different perspectives, why don't we start with what is your own vision, about open banking? Let's not make it too much about the technology. Open banking is almost like a life philosophy, in fintech. So, what's your own vision about it? Let's start a little bit by setting the ground. Paola.
Well, to Intesa Group, open banking is the extension of the physical and digital network to both our clients and the prospect clients. And it is about cooperating with other realities. It's about partnerships. It's about working with fintechs. It's about providing our customers with a better service whenever they want it, however they want it.
That's a good definition. Laurent, go.
I think for us, from your perspective, when we talk about open banking, it's very much linked to what the internet has done to knowledge. Before we used to read books, and suddenly came the internet, and the knowledge was available everywhere. Everyone could be following a class from the MIT, from Harvard, medicine, literature, philosophy, whatever you want, and you can go very deep into it. Open banking for us is way more than just seeing the data of your other banks in one single platform, even if probably it starts from here. It's giving to our clients the ability to read everything they have in their books, accountingly speaking, their assets, their positions, what's coming, what's going to go out. And that allows us to push them some smart decisioning. So that's really bringing some better knowledge, better time decision making to the clients. It's reinventing the bank relationship. We start being a place where clients come to like, I need this, can you provide it to me? But we come to them and we push them some ideas. So if you make the parallel with the marketing and you have the push and pull strategy, with open banking we can make push. We can really go to the client and say, look, it's the right time for you to do this. We've had this is backed by all those data analyzing, and that's really where you start making smart banking. That's how we see those things happening.
Paola, would you agree with the statement that for Intesa Sanpaolo is the largest bank in Italy, but also for most of global banks, open banking represents both an opportunity but also potentially a challenge, right? Because being completely open also gives the opportunity to the customers to sort of lower, the barrier to switch, typically maybe from one bank to another, but and also some sort of, I want to say, mindset adaptation, if you want to this new openness. Whilst on the other side, on the right hand of my screen, for you guys, for someone like you, Laurent, and Neo, it is almost like a DNA. You were born into that. Paola, what's your take? Would you agree with my sentence?
Well, of course, in every change, there is always an opportunity and there is always a challenge. It always depends on how you approach this. So Intesa Sanpaolo in Italy has today approximately 12 million of customers. 10 million of our customers are multi-channel customers, first of all, and 6 million of those are mobile customers. And just some data, because data is important. What we achieved, first of all, it's a very large number, as you can imagine. So for a traditional bank to have this number of users, let's say in the internet banking and in the mobile banking, it's a very relevant number. And it's very interesting also to see how many times our clients access our app, for instance, in a week. So the average number of accesses is 6 in a week. And I would say we have peaks of 20, 25 accesses in a day. Two considerations behind this. The first is, we were talking before about change, about how traditional banks can adapt. It's obvious that to be able to support this, of course, in the last months has that is, very easy, very fintech-like, very appealing, and we've tried and we've brought to our app several operations and several services to our clients. Like sometimes they are similar to banking services. So just to give you an example, we've created an app that is called Per Me Salute, and our clients can access this and make book an appointment with a doctor and then have some benefits like discounts or paying in installments, and then we've created on the other experience with services and technology items, like you can buy an iPhone through our app. So of course it is difficult for a bank that is so large as Intesa Sanpaolo and I've heard before months and millions, and yes, it's obvious we have a very big number of clients. We have a very resilient structure and core banking, and we need to keep it this way. And if you imagine, when we're talking about open banking, we're also talking about security, and cyber security. So imagine the investments you need to do. But on the other hand, I think that the other relevant thing is anticipating, is looking forward. So I don't fully agree with what Peter was saying, that traditional companies don't really look ahead. I think that we did that. It's not so easy. Of course, you need to think in 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. Sometimes you need to do investments before others, and what is key is the timing, because you don't need to be too fast, but you don't need to be too slow. So it's not so easy to identify this. I think we all know the direction now, but it's a matter of speed.
Laurent.
So from us, we really don't see the open banking as we don't see that much the threat factor. We see way more the opportunity factor. Of course, it's way easier to see it probably this way when you're the smaller player. But I also think for banks that should be the opportunity. With definitely what keeps the clients with you, what makes the client sticking with a brand, with a platform, or with a bank, at the end is the type of service you develop for them. And the more you're able to come up, we were talking in the presentation about the new world where we're living, which is the never normal world, or I think that was the concept that Peter mentioned. I think in that never normal world, clients, they need guidance. They need you to be able to come up anticipating situation, proposing things, and that this open data, open banking helps banks to come up with better proposition. At least it should help banks to come up with better proposition, anticipate better their clients' need, especially in such a diverse environment of clients. We just focus at NEO on B2B and very much on international operations, but already when we can go to a client and say, look, we've seen your cash flows, we know you'll be short of $, 6 months from now, you should already start hedging that position and probably putting some financing into play. I think that opens very interesting services you can push to clients. And one other very interesting point, I think also, it's the ability to cross-sell. And I think Paula was making the parallel of selling iPhones and booking doctor appointments. Of course, we don't do that on our B2B international bank account, but it's true that using the API connectivity, we can easily distribute some export finance product into what we have in the scope of services that we get. We can push our pricing into e-commerce platforms so that they can convert their cash flows in real time or price their item almost in real time in roughly 30 currencies. Do that type of things, having the ability to make them simple and quick without heavy project, heavy developments is what brings the revolution, because that allows our clients to be more reactive, to decide better, to be more efficient, and themselves to develop better product. And I think if the open data world sort of push that that positive cycle that moves it on, that's where the win is.
So before I actually jump to the next and last question, that is going to be a little bit different for each one of the speakers, I want to remind all of you that are listening that you can actually ask questions in the chat. I know it might be a little bit sort of late to say it only now, but at the same time, we're going to make sure that we either go back with you by asking the speakers these questions and make sure that we entertain the dialogue online. So one question to Laurent, building up on this last answer. So I recently read an article that I am pretty sure is not unfamiliar to you, from the founder of one of the sort of more solid, like a B2B banks in the UK. And the CEO was actually sort of claiming about the bank becoming profitable, one of the first bank in Europe to become profitable. In China, we know that like neobanks, whether B2B or B2C, are already profitable. How is sort of open banking and also like AI in making sure that both the data you collect are helping you personalizing the offers to your customer, is helping your path to profitability, Laurent?
Well, I think definitely when it comes about fintech, we've seen a lot of very big fintech raising big money, mostly on the promise of better user interface and a more simple approach to banking, and definitely they paved the way. But what we've also realized is that it's extremely hard, especially in the B2B neobanking, to live from just euro deposit and credit card spending. That's just not the way you can turn profitable. At the end, what we see is our clients, even though they come and shop at a neobank, they have exactly the same needs and they have the same expectations as what they would have when they go to a normal bank. So when they come to quote hedging product, they want competitive pricing, they want real-time ticking, they want professional reporting, they want connectivity with their SAP system. I mean, all those things are complex, and you need to have them in your offering. And when you have them, at the contrary, that brings a very high value to clients. And then we start seeing some very professional set of services that clients are ready to pay expensive on the software as a service mode, and that's what's probably pushing neobanks to profitability. And whatever you can build on the top of open banking is probably going to help to that. So the more it allows you to replace expensive treasury management system, to replace expensive modules that traditional ERP system have been selling you, the more you can put that with your neobank account, the more clients are likely to enter in a subscription mode. And that's quite interesting because this is where you really turn your banking almost as a software. We have a pricing mix where we have transaction fees and we have subscription fees. And we see that the more we push sophisticated analytics tool to clients, the subscription is even getting higher sometimes than the pure transactional mode. And I think that's the type of new models that we'll see appearing in the coming times, and open banking, open data is definitely sort of the fuel that's going to fuel this growth.
Thank you, Laurent. Paola, I wanted to give you the opportunity to expand a little bit more when you say that even large organizations actually can look up to the future, right? Because as a group head of innovation, you also, and I know it because I'm part of it, you also sort of established a direct link with the venture arm of the bank, and you are the one who basically is in charge of most of the collaboration projects with some large, some not that large fintechs, because maybe is the idea that is triggering something. So why don't you share a little bit more how a dinosaur can still look to the future? Dinosaur for dimensions, not for the ancient aspect of it. I know you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Again, I'll give you a couple of numbers. So in these 2 years, we've integrated and gone live with about 30 fintechs in our core processes. So I think this is a very large number. And besides all the rest of the innovation that we did maybe with big techs, or we've developed it internally, but doing a cooperation with 30 fintechs, integrating their procedures, their way of approaching the market within the world of Intesa Sanpaolo is something that is, let's say, pretty challenging. And we did this with the curiosity and with the approach of let's try and improve ourselves, let's try and improve our services, let's try and bring to our clients something that is better, quicker, or less expensive. So I was we were listening before about the instant lending of SMEs. Well, Intesa did it. We launched that service in July of this year. And we did that service with 3 startups. And we've introduced a near real-time SME loan that is live today for our clients, that has a completely new model and approach of analyzing risk that is based on open banking and PSD2, and that besides using this, let's say, real data and cash flow analysis, it also introduces new elements of credit risk. So, for instance, what we call the web sentiment for a company. So we're not analyzing only the financial elements, but we are looking forward, and we understood that it's also important to take some other type of data that maybe has never been used in the credit field, let's say, structure like that, and introduce this to create a new risk model. So this is an example, and we are live, and what we are aiming to do in the 2021 is to take this model and bring it also to the prospect clients, because of course this new model that is fully online, near real time, gives us the possibility to analyze a prospect client to Intesa Sanpaolo and provide them with credit. So this is one example, and I could tell you other things. I think it's, again, innovation is a process, for sure. In a large company as ours, it is a process, and you need to be very focused in this process, but it's also a mindset. And I think that Intesa Sanpaolo Group and Intesa Sanpaolo people have this mindset. We are curious. We try always to do what's best and what's the next best action in the market. And I can tell you that this approach is very relevant, and it can transform a player. We have very solid history and basis, but we are looking to the future with, curiosity again.
Paola, Laurent, thank you so much for being with us today. We are a little bit over time, and I enjoyed thoroughly this conversation. And stay tuned. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, Michele, Paolo, it's time to wrap it up, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We almost reached the end of this fantastic event. Listen to you guys. I have jotted down a takeaway quote that I want to read it to you. So, I think that everybody here has to create you have to create in your organization a culture of experimentation enabled by cloud technologies, because experiments are no longer just for startups today. So I think that this summarizes a little bit what we just said. Okay, Paolo, I leave it up to you to wrap up here.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Matteo. I think that we did a very great job. I think that Matteo couldn't imagine, like myself, 3-4 years ago, something like this today, full digitally because of COVID. But I think that we demonstrated our strong and our resilience. So I want to thank all the speakers, the guests, because of the interest they shown today and also in the last 4 years about FinTech Talk. I think that we have a great opportunity to share also in the next days using our channels some questions or points, as Matteo said before. And so stay tuned on our channels. If I can say, if I can summarize what I can take away from today is first about leadership. I think that as leaders, we need to be focused, to have a vision, and to be courageous, because we need direction and we need to experiment in new models. Second, about numbers, investment. I think it's clear if we invest in payments, open finance, AI and wealth management, I think that we could do a great investment for the future. And finally, I think that all the people talked about collaboration. So I think that the partnership between fintech incumbents and all the players could be better than the past. So let me also thank Riccardo Motta, Ilaria Azzi, Daniela Barone, Luca Cerruti, Marco Mione, and all the people who work hard to make this possible. I want to thank again Matteo, Michele. Thank you very much for your great presentation and job. And I'm proud, we are proud to announce that we soon will start again to work on FinTech Talk 2020, the first. And so stay tuned and take care. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Ciao Paolo. Ciao Matteo.
Bye bye.
Ciao.